Now I'd like to welcome to the stage some of those leaders who are shaping the field both now and hopefully in the next 20 years. So this panel is going to be moderated by, come on up, by Beskok, who is the Associate Dean for Research, Innovation, and Industry Partnerships in the George R. Brown Chair of Mechanical Engineering at Southern Methodist University. The panel includes Maxx Arguilla, who is the Assistant Professor of Chemistry at UC Irvine, Dionne, who is a Professor of Material Science and Engineering and of Radiology at Stanford University, and Thomas Epps, who is the Alan and Myra Ferguson Distinguished Professor of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at the University of Delaware. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ali Beskok, and I'm honored to be here today. This morning and till now, we have talked about the beginning of the National Nanotechnology Initiative and the developments made through. And state of the art was also, covered with keynote lecture and various panelists. And also, some of the panelists look into the future needs as well. However, our panel is specifically, charged to look into the future of nanotechnology. And before we do that, we have to actually understand, the background of our panelists and where they are right now, so that where they're trying to go and how can it be possible, but what is necessary to push them to the next level. So this is what we're going to talk about in the next few minutes. And having said that, I would like to reintroduce our panelists so that together we can look into the future of nanotechnology. So Dr. Thomas Epps is the Alan and Myra Ferguson Distinguished Professor of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at the University of Delaware. He's also the director of the NSF Center for Hybrid, Active, and Responsive Materials and deputy director of the DOE Center for Plastics Innovation. Dr. Jennifer Dionne is a professor of material science and engineering and a professor of radiology at Stanford University. She's the senior fellow of the Precourt Institute for Energy and an affiliate faculty of BioX. Most recently, she served as Stanford's inaugural vice provost of shared facilities and research platforms. Dr. Maxx Arguilla is an assistant professor in the Department of Chemistry at University of California, Irvine. He recently received the prestigious NSF Career Award. So as we welcome them to this panel, we will start with looking into their current research. So starting with you, Thomas, can you please describe your current research in general terms and comment on its potential impacts on science and society?
Yes. So my research focuses on polymers or polymeric materials. And basically what we do is we have our fundamental understanding of how polymers behave on the nanoscale, and we apply that to a variety of different applications. We apply it to everything from drug delivery and gene therapy. We heard a little bit about that from Chad Merkin this morning, to plastics waste, how we can actually take plastics waste and valorize and upcycle plastics waste. Looking at methods for turning sustainable feedstocks such as biomass into that next generation of polymeric materials, as well as using polymers for everything from coatings for military vehicles to polymers for electrolyte membranes to help, for example, your cars charge faster and go longer on the charge without a fire.
Perfect, thank you. How about you, Jennifer?
Great. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the NNI and all of the organizers of this workshop for the chance to be on this panel. It's exciting to be on the future of nanotechnology because I feel like I have enough gray hairs and wrinkles to have kind of grown up with the field, but it's exciting to think about what the next 20 years hold. As Ali mentioned, my name is Jen Dionne. I'm a faculty member at Stanford in both material science and in radiology. And my work focuses on nanophotonics, which is the science of controlling light on deeply sub-wavelength scales. In my case, generally at the molecular level. And what we do is use light as a tool both to detect different molecules and biomarkers, generally in a label-free way, and then also to direct those molecular transformations. So my research really spans health in the biosensing case and sensing different molecules, and also sustainability in terms of controlling chemical reactions and chemical transformations. And several of our speakers this morning mentioned the importance of new tools. In many ways, I view myself as a tool builder for my chemical and biological collaborators. So I frequently collaborate with folks in Stanford's new School of Sustainability, as well as in Stanford School of Medicine, to try to develop tools for them that allow them to detect or direct the molecules that they are most interested in. And just to wrap up with a few applications, I'll highlight two, one in the health, one in the sustainability space. In the health space, we have developed kind of a miniaturized portable microscope that allows us to detect tuberculosis in sputum, and within 15 seconds determine which antibiotic that tuberculosis would respond best to. So you don't have to wait 40 days for culturing. And we are now deploying that in TB endemic regions. And then in the second case, we have developed environmental in situ transmission electron microscopes that allow us to visualize how catalysts are operating, both to enable high yield and selective chemical reactions, including ammonia synthesis, which generally takes place at extremely high temperatures and pressures. We can now control it to happen at room temperature and pressure in a more sustainable way using sunlight. And then also looking at conversion of carbon dioxide into high value chemicals from smokestacks.
Thank you very much. Max.
Yes, awesome. So yeah, I'd like to say that this is a really special event for, especially for me, like as an assistant professor, as an early career professor, really thinking about how nanotechnology evolved in the past couple of years and seeing, the convergence of, the scientists, the engineers, the policymakers, and seeing that in an early stage is really something that probably I will take in the next couple of years. So I'm a Filipino solid state chemist, and I think about materials at the nanoscale and beyond. So my training really started from a multidisciplinary approach in thinking about how we can scale materials down to the nanoscale and even approaching to the atomic scale. So something that has been mentioned earlier are these carbon nanotubes, single wall carbon nanotubes, but something that we have seen in the past couple of years is also the emergence of these two-dimensional materials, an example of which is graphene, which is a single atom thick layer of carbon. And so being part, as a graduate student, being part of an NSF MERSEC center, I've seen really the convergence of chemistry, physics, and engineering to really think about the vision, which really drove, my program in the past couple of years as well, because the vision is really imagining, our current device landscape, our current integrated circuit landscape, but comprised of materials that are atomically thin. So when I was evolving as a scientist, I saw that happening in two-dimensional materials that we can think of as Lego blocks that we can stack different colors and different properties of. But one question really started, in a way, triggering my curiosity. If we can think of integrated circuits right now, we need to be able to connect these patchwork. So when I was building my group, I really thought about maybe we can make one-dimensional analogs of these atomically thin materials. And when I looked at the materials library, there's only carbon nanotube in there and a couple of other examples. So as a chemist, really what drives my program right now is to think about, a dimension lower and a length scale lower, and really thinking about one-dimensional analogs of two-dimensional materials. So imagine taking a strip of that two-dimensional material as if you're taking a spaghetti out of lasagna and really thinking about how to make that spaghetti, right? So as chemists, we try to think about that and we try to make different recipes for that spaghetti. And really in the past 4 years, we opened a nice goodie box of different one-dimensional materials. And the vision for us is to think about these materials at these dimensionalities that will have different properties that will build up, say, for example, an integrated circuit. So in the past couple of years, we have found analogs of these materials that are metallic, semiconducting, superconducting, magnetic, and even direct analogs of biomacromolecular helical materials. So my program is really taking, or pioneering this direction in such a way that we try to uncover the materials design rules to create new analogs of these one-dimensional materials beyond what we currently know in the periodic table. We think about, as inspired by soft matter and biomacromolecular materials, how we can use these very thin, almost sub-nanometer thick chains and figure out ways with which we can assemble these as higher order hierarchical structures. And also we actively think about how the structure, composition, and property of these materials would endow them functionalities. And very recently we have seen, sub-nanometer thick analogs of these material that would emit robust photons at room temperature as freestanding structures. We have seen analogs which would detect temperature very sensitively, and very recently we found ways with which we can guide magnetic spins across different orientations and different directions in a single crystal.
Thank you very much, indeed. The work is done in the lab, but I think the ultimate goal is, of course, to transition these into industry with new technologies. So what are the challenges of transitioning your research from the laboratory to industry? And I'd like to begin with Thomas, please.
Well, I think one of the things that I've been lucky to be able to do is I was actually in one of the first classes of the National Science Foundation's Growing Convergence Research Program. And what that allowed me to do is not only think about our materials at the nanoscale, but also bring in collaborators who were focused on things like toxicology, on eco-hydrology, on policy, on enzyme engineering. And so I think what we then began to understand, for example, is what are all of the implications? So we heard a little bit from I think it was our development panel in terms of thinking about once I've made that nanomaterial, what happens to it at the end of the day. And so one of the challenges is actually understanding how to run all of those tests. What needs to be done? What needs to be understood? How can I actually scale up something from I'm doing it in the lab to a size scale where I'm not necessarily commercial yet, but I'm at a size scale where I can do the leaching tests and the other sorts of things that we heard a little bit about this morning. And that, of course, costs money. And in some cases, depending on what you're doing, there's bridge funding that is needed. Sometimes it's available. Sometimes it's a little bit harder to seek out.
Thank you. Jennifer.
Yeah, Thomas, I think that was a great answer. In thinking about challenges in transitioning a technology from, lab to industry, maybe first I'll say in the last couple of years, I've started my first company, and being in the Bay Area, maybe it's a little bit easier than some other places in the country, but I've definitely drank the Kool-Aid and really enjoyed the venture. So I think from kind of recent, battle wounds, I can speak to what some of the challenges are. The first is really defining the right problem. And I think the wonderful thing about working in a university is that you can do, fundamental curiosity-driven research. But if you want to translate some of your findings into the lab, it's really important that you do the thorough kind of customer discovery and really understand the pain points of end users in a very deep, intricate way. And especially if you're going to translate the technology into a commercial entity as opposed to a nonprofit, you need to also make sure that the market is there so that way you can attract the right sort of bridge funding that Thomas was talking to. I also think, infrastructure is really important, and this is where the NNI's pioneering of shared facilities really comes into play. As a founder myself, we've made tremendous use of some of the DOE user facilities for nanofabrication, for nanocharacterization in a way that would be cost prohibitive if we didn't have those user facilities available, thanks to the NNI funding. And I hope that sort of shared infrastructure can continue to grow, for example, with the CHIPS and Science Act or with the NQI, because I think that's really pivotal when you are trying to transition technologies that come from and act like the NNI that are squarely rooted in kind of deep tech. We're not just building software, we're building the hardware and the materials. And then finally, I'd say when you're thinking about transitioning a technology, from the lab to an end user, it's really important to think about designing for deployment or designing for scale up and manufacturability, right from the start. I think oftentimes as a university professor, it's fun and rewarding to think about the fundamental science and what is a very creative scientific solution. But sometimes in commercialization, some of the best solutions are kind of the easier and maybe less scientifically challenging solutions. And I think it's important to think about kind of the cost and scale up and manufacturability right from the get-go in terms of solving a problem, so you know what those constraints are before you build a solution that may not suit the end user.
Thank you. Max?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question, especially for an early career academic. But I think the materials landscape of nanoscience and nanotechnology is quite a unique landscape in terms of how, as Jennifer alluded to, you can translate fundamental research to, an end user technology and application. So from my end, really the sort of the challenge, I think, would be really to start understanding the needs of the different, the industrial and private sector, and, what we really have to design for. Or as a chemist myself, like we know how to make materials, but we can always come up with material solutions to problems that we think are important. But I think dialogues such as this, for example, today, or in other occasions wherein there is a convergence between the academic and the industrial sectors, would be quite important for early or mid-career scientists, because I guess if we work towards a common goal, that will be easier instead of trying to sort of figure out our own problems. So with that, and I think, and something that Kay mentioned earlier, an example of which would be the Chip and Science Act, right? For example, wherein there are mechanisms with which we can bring together industry and academics to, work towards a common goal. For this example, figuring out the future of micro or nano electronics. And something that is quite interesting from my end is, I guess, similar to how we're calling this session, there is a mechanism called the future of semiconductors, which is quite interesting, because then that's something that we as solid state or materials chemists think about, and something that will directly benefit, the semiconductor and microfab industry. So I think those are some of the things that, it's still not perfect, and hopefully there are many ways with which there are more opportunities to interface with the industry and with the academic, and also, of course, finding ways to be able to fund this or to catalyze these interactions, putting, both groups in the same room and, solving these big problems.
Thank you. Actually, Thomas, when we were chatting earlier, you were talking about legislation and policy issues related to plastic waste. Do you wish to say a few words about that at all?
Yeah, I will just mention that, one of the key challenges, depending on the field, is policy can have a large influence on the direction that research goes. We heard a little bit about that a few minutes ago, but one key example is if I think about something like plastics waste and pyrolysis. For those of you who know what that is, when we're talking about the case where we're heating up that plastics waste to break it down into chemicals that can be used for fuels or building blocks, that's legal in some states, and is illegal in others. And so that influences then, for example, the direction of research that I might think about doing in Delaware versus that I might think about doing in Pennsylvania. And so there are opportunities and things to consider even from the commercialization standpoint. So Jen was mentioning getting in touch with customers through things like NSF has obviously got the I-Core and those sorts of things. You can go to one place and say you have a great technology, but that might not be something that fits within the legal or policy framework of that area, and you might have to look somewhere else. So it can have a huge impact.
Thank you. Thank you, indeed. So the next question is, what kinds of future collaborations, resources, and funding are necessary to reach your goals? Let's start with Thomas again, please.
I mean, I guess, from my standpoint, in terms of collaboration, I know we'll get to it a little bit later, so I won't focus too much on it right now. But one of the key things when you're dealing with nanoscale materials, especially in the areas that we work in, which are more sustainable feedstock. So let me give you just a quick example of what we would typically use as a sustainable feedstock. We would go out into the forest. We would get, say, twigs, leaves from maybe your yard waste that's been discarded and actually turn that into a next generation polymeric material that you might use as a coating for a vehicle. You might use it as your next cup. You might use it as your next case for your Apple computer. But the point is that when we start thinking about these systems, they're very complex. And so if I think about that twig, it's not only what type of tree did it come from, what time of year did it drop, how old was that tree, how am I going to actually process that material? And when you think about those variables, or you move to plastics waste and you think about what is that plastic material, what color was it? What dyes are in it? What antioxidants were in it? Is there dirt in it? What was the molecular weight of that material? Again, what was it bound to? Was it just polyethylene, or was it a polyethylene that was multi-component because it was wrapping, say, for example, a medical device? When I start thinking about those things, I need to have collaborators that can focus on, for example, some of the machine learning tools so that we don't necessarily have to invent everything on our own, but we can also go back and sort of develop kind of connections that we wouldn't be able to do on our own. And that's particularly relevant to nanomaterials because we start to get to the point where you have individual chains at interfaces. And so how that interface changes actually, many of us know this, of course, but it really has an impact on how the material behaves. And so those are the types of collaborations that are needed, in addition to some of the others that we've already talked about in terms of whether it's toxicity assessments, whether it's with our catalytic science and technology, in my case as a polymer person colleagues, our enzyme engineers that are helping us break down and design new, really precise structures.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Great. So, yeah, your question is a really good one and a broad one in terms of what future collaborations, funding, and resources would be needed. I'll start by saying that my work at Stanford is inherently collaborative. We try to, like I said, work with colleagues in both the School of Medicine and in the School of Sustainability to define problems that exist in those spaces, both with my faculty colleagues as well as with some industry funders. And I think in terms of kind of what the future of nanoscience might hold, first of all, I think, yeah, those sorts of collaborations need to be sustained. I also think we need to further strengthen the collaborations between academics and with, say, government, NGOs, industry, and like Thomas mentioned, also with, policymakers thinking about, what policies and regulations may or may not exist in a particular location. Thomas mentioned kind of machine learning algorithms. In many ways, we have used ML and AI for so long in our research that when people ask me if we use it, it's similar to asking a physicist if they use math in their research. There are certain areas where it's extremely useful, but I think we'll see more and more AI playing a role in nanoscience research. And we heard in Chad's talk, for example, the development of trillions of materials. Now, I'm really excited about the library of materials we can use for sustainable chemical manufacturing. But there's simply no way a graduate student could make, make and study a small subset of those materials. So I think collaborations with folks who really pioneer automation and development of self-driving labs to have more higher throughput analysis that let us hone in on the materials that are going to provide the solutions to some of our biggest sustainability challenges. And then finally, I'll mention just on the kind of future resources side of things, I hope that there's continued investment in some of the shared infrastructure that NNI has already set up. Having overseen some of the shared facilities at Stanford, spanning both the School of Engineering facilities as well as School of Medicine and Humanities and Sciences. These are amazing resources, not only in terms of the tools and the instrumentation that is housed within them, but also in terms of the communities that they bring together. I think shared facilities are a watering hole for new ideas and new collaborations to be spawned. but they are something that you really need to foster throughout the years. And I hope that NNI and others can continue sustaining the infrastructure, both in these shared facilities as well as in national user facilities, for example, the DOE user facilities that we use quite frequently for electron microscopy as well as for some ultra-fast measurements. And I think the national quantum foundries being stood up by the NQI are also an exciting resource. The final one, though, that I think is perhaps needed, especially outside of the Bay Area, is kind of facilities that can help with the translation. So going back to Ali's question before, yeah, if you want to translate a solution from the lab out into the world, oftentimes it's challenging, even in the Bay Area, to find the right sort of lab space, because naturally universities don't allow for commercial research. And if you need, for example, a fume hood or even some bench space, that is the sort of space that SBIR funding is not going to cover. You probably need a few $1 million to be able to rent a lab space. So I think an exciting opportunity for the future is thinking about more of these kind of incubator or like shared facilities that have bench space and hood space and maybe machine shop spaces for device prototyping as you're starting some of that initial scale up out of a university.
Thank you. Before we go to Max, Thomas, did you have something to say?
Well, I just was going to add two quick things. One, Jen mentioned, which is the shared facilities at the national lab scale. I think that is very critical as we move towards that next generation of nanomaterials, especially being able to look at things in real time in operando or in situ in operando as our reactions happen. So I think that, for example, the scattering facilities, whether that's neutron, X-ray type sources are critical. The other one is I would be remiss if I didn't mention my favorite collaborators, which are associated with techno-economic analysis and life cycle assessment. I've also been fortunate to have a couple startups that I've been involved in, and one of the things that we do is always, when we're looking at our engineering solutions, even in the lab, we're always thinking about, is this going to potentially be practical? And so we get a lot of guidance, for example, from our LCA and TEA collaborators. One of my favorite ones is right down the hall from me in terms of helping guide us sometimes, helping us figure out when we're on the wrong track, but also then helping us guide us in the right directions in terms of solving some key scientific challenges.
Thank you. How about you, Max?
Yes, so maybe I'll start by echoing what was mentioned already with the infrastructure. So something that I want to also highlight is that when we work with nanoscale materials, these are very thin materials that would readily degrade and would readily, oxidize even, just walking down the hole. So I think the access towards infrastructure is very enabling and very important, not only for the science, but also for the training of the next generation of students. So for example, as a solid-state chemist, we would always fly to synchrotron facilities or at Argonne National Lab or at Oak Ridge National Lab to do our synchrotron experiments. And that, is pretty much set there, right? But there are different facilities with which, except for example, characterization of nanoscale materials that can be more localized or be more like hotspots. So say, for example, the one at Harvard before the MIT Nano facility was developed. When I was a postdoc at MIT, I just take the T 2 stops away, and then I can use that facility, which is, I think, partly involved with the NNI network as well. So some of those things that, for example, caters to the general Boston metro area across different universities is really enabling and really good for the training. And if we can have many of those and many of these hotspots, then I think we'll be able to open up access to academics, to commercial partners, and even for, primarily undergrad institutions or R2s or R3 institutions that cannot access these facilities readily. So sort of looping into that, the training as well of the next generation is important, because those are the folks who will be, really doing the collaborations if we're, going towards collaborative efforts with multidisciplinary partners and collaborators. And I think something that is important, still on the theme of the infrastructure, is making that barrier a lot easier for the next generation of students to be able to use sophisticated instruments. Say, for example, like chemists were used to beakers and we're used to these like glassware and so on. We don't know how to operate a scanning tunneling microscope, for example, from the get-go. But there are a lot of ways with which one can develop instrumentation that are plug and play and that are easy for students to get in and get their first measurements and eliminate that barrier to training and to be able to enable them to gain the skills to do the measurements, but also at the same time open up a new set of instruments as enabled by these user facilities, for example. So from there, I'm trying to highlight really this notion of multidisciplinarity and developing these collaborations from experimentalists, from computational folks, with theory folks, for example, at least in the development of fundamental materials. And that really relies on developing a common language, and developing collaborations that are starting early on. So I mentioned, for example, the MRSEC, the Material Research Science and Engineering centers, which enables the training of undergraduate students, grad students, and postdocs to be able to interface with physicists, engineers, chemists, and so on, quite early on in their career, which then would propagate as they build their own programs and so on. So mechanisms such as that, like center level funding, and hopefully those that would enable early career or mid-career researchers to get into the game as well a little bit easier, because I think, as have been, what have been alluded to, many times today, it is a multi or even transdisciplinary effort to push nano and even beyond nano a little bit. So I think if we're focusing on these collaborations that would spring from the training of the next generation of scientists, mechanisms which will bring everyone together, develop that jargon, that language early, and be able to develop a common language with which a chemist can talk to a physicist, to an engineer, and then solve this problem, from materials discovery to optimization of the synthesis, to the characterization of these different emergent materials, and also finally into the integration into prototype devices. So I think if we can complete that cycle, and there are mechanisms in place, if we can improve those mechanisms in place, I think we can get that into a more productive system.
Thank you. Earlier on, Jennifer, you mentioned about using machine learning and AI. So the general question for the panelists is, what is the role of AI or ML in your research? How does their use further accelerate your progress? Why don't we start with Jennifer this time?
Yeah, I'll start. In some of our work on detecting and sequencing molecules and different biomarkers, we rely on the vibrational scattering spectra of molecules or whole cells. So Raman spectroscopy or IR spectra. And I think for us, we use a lot of AI models to assist with the interpretability of those spectra. So these spectra are extremely information rich. They contain information about essentially all vibrational modes of the molecules that are in a particular sample. And I mentioned the TB example at the outset. Right now, what we're trying to do is wastewater-based epidemiology of bacterial pathogens. So you could imagine there are potentially hundreds or even thousands of different types of bacteria that you would find in wastewater, and being able to track not only the different bacteria, but what their drug susceptibilities or antimicrobial resistance profiles might be, is quite challenging if you want to scale up traditional PCR methods, because you would need as many primers to go after all the various bacterial species you might see. So what we do is we collect Raman spectra of many different types of bacterial species and strains and drug susceptibilities. And rather than analyzing that spectra by hand or by identifying different peaks, we rely on ML models. So we train the computer to identify the Raman spectra, and then when it sees indications of that spectra in the wastewater, it can know that sort of pathogen is present. So I think AI does play a really important role in some aspects of research. AI has been around for a long time. I have many friends and mentors who have been doing AI, probably since the 70s or 80s. I think what makes it really exciting now is the prominence and prevalence of big data sets. So I think to build really robust AI models, it helps to have large amounts of data. And this is where Initiatives like the NNI have, I think, in many ways, kind of democratized access to tools that allow us to collect data and then have that data, for the most part, freely available to analyze and learn new things that are very challenging for a human to, sit there and analyze, or at least would take too long. So I think AI has a really important role to play, especially in biology now that there's vast amounts of data from, say, the Human Genome Project or from vibrational and Raman spectroscopy. And I think we'll see AI playing an increasingly important role in what folks historically have called maybe the materials genome project, or as we try to define new materials, for information sciences, whether quantum or neuromorphic or classical computing, or for sustainability, for example, in new polymers, new catalysts. I think AI is going to help us more quickly hone in on these optimal materials combinations for whatever reactions or manufacturing processes we're trying to optimize for.
Thank you. Actually, the nature of data is format. Who's going to put all that data in, as well as how to access it in an efficient manner is important. And there are also intellectual property related issues, with that as well. So, Thomas, do you have anything specific that?
Yeah, well, I would say a couple of things. I think that one of the things that you just sort of teed up a little bit is that when I start thinking about that data, there's a vast amount. If we just even take the published scientific literature, there's a vast amount of scientific literature. And as people start working more and more with nanomaterials, there's a need to actually develop routines that can go seek out that data, determine basically the validity of that data, and context. Context is very important when we start thinking about materials, and actually be able to then curate that data such that it can be used in machine learning. And that becomes very prevalent when we're doing something, again, like whether it's plastics waste. So we actually have a person on our team, a computer scientist, and one of the roles that we have for that person is working with some polymers graduate students on how to develop routines that can sort of scour and spider the literature and actually bring back to us, here are the outcomes of various studies. And that becomes quite important, as we saw in Chad Merkin's talk, that you could have a catalyst that might have 4 components, but they're not all at a 2-to-1 ratio or 3-to-1 ratio. You can get a lot of that information from the 1 trillion experiments that he can do very quickly. You can also get some of that from machine learning, provided that you have curated the data in the right way so that your routines can actually read it and output useful results.
So all these data should be provided in a accessible format with consistency.
Well, I mean, if I can comment on that, I think that's a very interesting, challenge to overcome, because you can provide the data and that's wonderful for machine learning routines. But I noticed a little bit how Chad Merkin answered that question about data, because you also have that challenge where data now becomes very valuable. And so there is that trade-off between data that's accessible so everyone can use it, and data which someone has spent a lot of money and effort to get, that then becomes valuable to just give away.
See, thank you. Maxx?
Yeah, so first of all, it's really exciting to be in a time wherein, I'm building my research program and we have all of these tools that will just propel it and catalyze it forward in terms of AI and machine learning. But it becomes also a little bit of field dependent. So I always tell my colleagues who work with organic materials and polymers, for example, that many of the rules to create organic molecules are understood a little bit, right? Or a little bit more than the others. So if you're thinking about inorganic materials, if you're thinking about silicon, germanium, or basically the rest of the periodic table, the set of rules are not defined. We're doing fundamental and basic research to define how this atom will interact with this other atom, how this layer or chain will interact with the adjacent layer or chain, and so on. So I think right now, at least for dense inorganic materials, we're sort of using this parallel, sort of data curation and data generation, and using AI and machine learning to catalyze that process and sort of have them evolve at the same time. So for example, my group does a lot of materials discovery. How do we make these new spaghetti out of non-carbon-based materials? There are some design rules that we can use, but we can catalyze that process by using machine learning approaches, recognizing the patterns and so on. But at the same time, we get it 50% of the time, or sometimes even less, because we still don't have the right understanding of the interactions that exist in these inorganic materials. So I think, it is very interesting that it is evolving right now, and we are moving, at the pace that, these two approaches will match up experimentally and, as catalyzed by AI and MD. And we're actually really tackling larger, more complex structures that before, like 10 years ago, if I started my program, my theory and computational collaborators would say no to a unit cell that is 20 by 20 by 50 angstrom large. So 2 by 2 by 5 nanometers is a large unit cell compared to silicon, which is about 4 by 4 by 4 angstroms. But now they're more enthusiastic to test their models to look into the properties of these complex structures. So we are really catalyzing the move towards complex nanoscale materials that within them have their own unique properties beyond just, scaling these materials now.
So we have last 3 minutes. Are there any questions, Courtney?
I think, and we might go over with this one, but I think one question that is coming back from the public is curious about what are you seeing in the next decade? Other than AI, which we just talked an awful lot about, what are you excited about to be doing within the next decade or so regarding nanotechnology?
So I think I'll just start and try to be brief. I think one of the key things is that when you're thinking about nanomaterials, a lot of the work right now is say, I'm going to design a nanomaterial that is going to do this. And so it has a certain shape, and we're very focused on how do we layer that nanomaterial the way that we want? How do we give it that spatial sort of heterogeneity or homogeneity, how we want to do that? I think one of the next generations of those materials is to say, okay, now that I have that material, can it adapt to its environment? So for example, if we have these sort of pie in the sky in our MRSAC. So I actually direct a MRSAC on hybrid active and responsive materials. And one of the goals is to actually use peptides and proteins such that if we had a drug delivery vehicle in the body, it could actually choose where to go. It could say, okay, I need to go here versus here. There are more tumor cells here versus there, so that's where I'm going to go. There's a blockage here in the artery, so let me stop here and take care of that. So basically have systems not necessarily fully autonomous per se, but just things that can actually respond to their nanoscale environments, I think is a very exciting opportunity. Even, for example, healing a hole in the floor, for example, or micro cracks in concrete. Those are opportunities for taking smart nanomaterials in that sense.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I'll go briefly. Yeah, there are two areas that I'm really excited about in the next decade, and I feel pretty optimistic that they will happen. One of which is this concept of sustainable chemical manufacturing and understanding how we can link the atomic scale and ultra fast scale of some of these processes to, say, the larger scale, reactor scale, whether in, say, steel manufacturing or manufacturing of chemicals that we need, whether fertilizers or fuels or pharmaceuticals. So I think this concept of kind of multi-scale understanding of how to enable sustainable chemical manufacturing, across industries, and also designing for kind of end of use, building off of what Thomas said. So kind of a sustainability moonshot is one area that I think nanoscience will play a huge role in. And I hope there perhaps can be one, if there already isn't one in the works, that maybe mimics the National Quantum Initiative and bringing together folks across sustainability sectors, both in academia, industry, government, et cetera. The second area that I'm really excited about is thinking about a human proteome project. So I think NIH and DOE played a substantial role in initiating the Human Genome Project probably about 30 years ago. That was a considerable infusion of government funding to sequence the full human genome. But if you look at the number of protein coding genes, it's about 20,000, and yet there are over 1 million different proteins that result from those 20,000 protein coding genes. So it's by no means a one-to-one correspondence. And Thomas was just mentioning kind of these reconfigurable materials that say, if you have a peptide, a protein can go to a particular place in our body. And yet we don't have the tools right now to be able to quantify or even qualify which proteins are present, because there are many different post-translational modifications and isoforms. And we of course have mass spec, kind of an oldie but goodie, but its throughput is limited. And I think I heard some statistic that only about 0.1% of all material that actually goes into the mass spec is efficiently ionized. So really challenging to figure out which proteins are there. And I think that will unlock and unblock a lot of technologies, both in health and in sustainability, as we think about, say, proteins as products that potentially can be reconfigurable and certainly more sustainable. So sustainability moonshot and a human proteome project.
All right, I'll try to make this quick. So 2 points as well. So one is the interfacing of different low dimensional materials. So I shared this vision a little bit earlier, wherein we can scale down the integrated circuit with ultra thin building blocks that we can stack together. That is being done right now. And beyond just the physical integration of these materials, many of which would generate new quantum states that we can use for quantum computing. Say, for example, graphene, when you twist 2 layers, it can, from a semi-metal, it will become a superconductor by just twisting it by 1.1 degrees, say, for example. So not just the scaling, but the emergence of new materials the emergence of new and emergent properties when we interface low dimensional 2D, 1D, 2D, 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 0D, and so on. And even the interfacing of organic and inorganic materials. Say, for example, a direction that is showing up recently in the literature and in the field is how we can leverage the crystallinity of inorganic materials to direct the order of organic building blocks, say peptides, polymers, and so on, and inducing some level of order and patterning in these structures through that interface, and also the emerging optical and electronic states from that interfacing of 2 ultra-thin materials. And then I guess the question of a more 10 or 20 years in the future, the vision is maybe right now we're thinking about materials wherein we scale them down, we integrate them together to come up with new functionalities. Maybe in the future, we'll be able to understand how atomic interactions in solid state materials, or defects, as Evelyn alluded to earlier, can be controlled at the atomic scale to generate single crystal devices with which we can direct and usher different types of carriers, like charges, like magnetic spins, like vibrational modes or photons, without any external perturbation or guidance or fabrication. So that is sounds like science fiction, but there are a lot of things that are already being done through this effort that can really, sort of one step further beyond the physical shaping of materials. Maybe we can, dab into the quantum realm and understanding of atomic interactions in these solid state materials, and use that and leverage that knowledge to, create machineries and even integrated circuit within just one material platform.
Perfect. Actually, that was the last question I was going to ask, but you asked already. So that finalizes our panel. I'd like to thank all the panelists, please.